Multiple times within the past week or so, the EU's Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius has floated the idea of a European Defence Union, an intergovernmental treaty that would include willing EU member states, Ukraine, the UK and Norway, to create an integrated union of defence capabilities across the continent. It comes amid discussions about a potential US military withdrawal from Europe, which analysts seem to think is increasingly likely, and is the latest in the EU's push to become self-sufficient in security and defence. Moreover, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy also seemed to pitch something similar in his interview on the Rest is Politics Leading podcast recently, saying there are strong countries which are part of Europe, the UK, Ukraine and Turkey, which will be stronger than the army of Russia. So, in this video, we'll take a look at Europe's various defence initiatives, this latest proposal for a European Defence Union, and how it could work. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. First, let's start with a broad summary of what the EU is currently doing on defence. Back in July 2024, when European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was re-elected for a second term, the second top priority in her mandate, after improving European competitiveness, was a new era for European defence and security. As well as boosting joint procurement, investing more into Europe's defence industry, creating a single market for defence, and strengthening EU civil and military preparedness. This largely came amid fears both of rising Russian aggression towards Europe and of a second Donald Trump presidency in the US, given that Trump had repeatedly derided NATO during the 2024 US election campaign, and even said he would encourage Russia to, quote, do whatever the hell they want to NATO members that didn't spend enough on defence. As such, over the past couple of years, the EU has been trying to build a network of other defence partnerships that don't depend on the US or NATO. In March, for instance, the EU signed a security and defence partnership with Australia, following similar agreements with both Canada and the UK in 2025. And back in 2024, the EU struck a series of bespoke defence pacts with Moldova, Norway, Japan, South Korea, Albania, and North Macedonia. As well as expanding its network of bilateral defence pacts, the EU has also been working on ways to improve internal collaboration on defence. For instance, in October, a few weeks after Russian drones had entered and crashed down on European territory, the EU announced 4 new intra-EU flagship projects: the European Drone Defence Initiative, the Eastern Flank Watch, the European Air Shield, and the European Space Shield, all to be launched this year and completed by 2028 at the latest. The EU is pushing for 40% of all defence procurement to be joint procurement by the end of 2027. Similarly, in November, the European Commission unveiled its plans for a military Schengen zone, an EU-wide military mobility area to allow the rapid transfer of troops and equipment across countries in the bloc. Under the plans, EU countries will have 3 days in peacetime and just 6 hours in emergencies to grant permission to other European armies that want to cross their border, with the current clearance time being weeks to months. As such, this European Defence Union proposal is the latest in a series of big EU defence initiatives. Based on an intergovernmental treaty, and potentially modelled on the EU Schengen zone, the idea has been floated by EU Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius multiple times over the past week. It would focus specifically on the integration of defence capabilities between participating EU countries, Ukraine, the UK and Norway, and would also serve as a, quote, strong security guarantee for Ukraine. Essentially, the European Defence Union would overcome the limits of the EU's existing treaties on industry and single market policy, which tend to treat defence as a matter of national security, and therefore limit how far the EU can integrate and coordinate continent-wide defence initiatives. Specifically, Article 346 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, or TFEU, states that any member state may take such measures as it considers necessary for the protection of the essential interests of its security which are connected with the production of or trade in arms, munitions and war material. While this clause was intended to protect member states' national industry, in practice it's been used by governments to justify favouring their own domestic defence suppliers instead of working collaboratively, thereby leading to a fragmented market and duplication of systems and capabilities within the EU. While the European Defence Union is really just a vague concept at the moment, and we don't have any concrete details, on Tuesday, a report by 2 researchers at the Centre of European Policy Studies outlined the legal ways the EU could achieve this defence union, suggesting it could be done via enhanced cooperation under Articles 326 to 334 of the TFEU. Because this enhanced cooperation mechanism lets a group of EU member states move ahead with policy even when not all 27 can agree, this would dilute the veto power of less willing member states who might want to block defence integration. Moreover, the fact it would come under the EU's current legal framework would allow EU institutions to contribute financial, diplomatic, operational and strategic planning resources to the Union, which could, over time, evolve into a common defence capability like NATO, but with a stronger industrial base inside the EU. A defence union could also potentially facilitate the joint stockpiling of weapons and ammunition at the EU level. Finally, there's also a lot of emphasis on Ukraine whenever the defence union is mentioned. It essentially looks like the EU is trying to fold in 3 non-EU countries that could make big contributions to European defence in different ways. Ukraine with its cutting-edge drone tech, the UK with its established military, and Norway with its massive sovereign wealth fund. Kubilius also suggested that integration of Ukraine into the single market and into a European defence union at the same time could be a clear part of the European strategic approach towards Ukraine. In other words, this sounds like a way to bring Ukraine, the UK and Norway closer to the EU on defence and industrial cooperation without full EU membership. The EU does seem to be expecting some opposition, or at least scepticism from member states, farmers and businesses in Eastern Europe regarding the further integration of Ukraine into the EU market. Acknowledging this, Kubilius said, "We can understand some of those concerns. They were very similar when Poland and the Baltic states were joining the European Union back in 2004. In 2000, when Lithuania, my country, started negotiations for our integration, our GDP per capita in PPP terms was reaching only 35% of the EU average. Now, the same parameter is around 95%. The same will happen with Ukraine. With integration towards the EU, Ukraine in 20 to 25 years' time will become a new economic tiger of Europe." So you're probably wondering what's next for this story, and how it's going to develop over the coming days and weeks. But it might be overwhelming trying to sift through the thousands of news articles trying to find one that you can trust not to feed you a false narrative. Luckily, we have a simple solution for you, and that solution is Ground News. You've probably heard us talk about Ground News before, the app and website that shows how the same story is covered across the political spectrum. But now more than ever, we need Ground News to truly understand what's really going on in the world around us. It's difficult finding trustworthy news sources, so Ground News will do the hard work for you, compiling thousands of articles and putting them in one easy-to-access place. Each article comes with a breakdown into bias distribution, factuality, and ownership of each individual source. For instance, if we take this story on the European Defence Union, we can easily see that 9 sources are currently reporting on it, with more coverage coming from the left. Looking at the headlines, we can dive deeper to understand the differences in reporting on each side, with the left focusing on the inclusion of Ukraine and the right framing it as the inclusion of non-EU allies. Our absolute favourite feature though is their blind spot feed. Here you can see all the stories you might not have seen on your usual feed, so even if you don't agree with the reporting, it's good to step out of your bubble. And it's not just us that feels this way. The Nobel Peace Centre also proudly endorses Ground News, calling it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. So, if you want to start questioning the narrative, you can join Ground News today, and using our link you'll get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. All you have to do is subscribe through the link in the description, go to ground.news/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.